Hey, everybody. Welcome as I interview well-known channeler Wendy Kennedy. She has been in this space for decades. People have been transformed by her communications about higher frequencies, interdimensionality, and this grand experiment we call life on Earth. Here's my interview with Wendy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Next Level Healing. I'm your host, Dr. Tara Perry. My guest today is Wendy Kennedy. She is a prominent channel and spiritual teacher. She has used her gifts and abilities to communicate with higher dimensional beings for the past 30 years. She assists others in recognizing and releasing their patterns and limiting beliefs to create the foundation for a life filled with greater health, abundance, love, and joy. Wendy lectures and channels throughout the United States and internationally. She was one of the 6 channels featured in the movie and book Tuning In, Spiritual Channelers in America. She is a featured guest on Gaia TV series, Interview with Extra Dimensionals, Open Minds with Regina Meredith, and Into the Vortex with Jimmy Church. Her work can also be found in the book, The Great Human Potential, Walking in One's Own Light, which is available in 7 languages. Welcome, Wendy.
Oh, hello. Thank you so much for having me.
So you have been in this space when it was a very rare thing to encounter somebody who was a channel. What was that like coming into that? Was it an abrupt thing? Was it a gradual thing? Did you always know you had these abilities?
No, I didn't know I had the ability. I think growing up, I was a very curious child. I was always drawn to books on the paranormal, books on UFOs, and it just seemed like a natural progression for me. That was always an interest. And then I started having visions when I was in my mid-20s, and I didn't really know what the visions were, and I kind of followed the path with that. And along the way, it led me to channeling. And when I came across it, I just knew it was something I was supposed to be doing. I didn't know anybody who did it. I didn't really know what it was. And I listened to that inner voice. And it took me about a year. I was doing self-development already, but I was studying meditation and yoga. And it took me a little bit, but then things kind of opened up and went from there.
What did your family think when you were kind of going off into this direction?
They were incredibly supportive. I mean, my brother had already kind of been on his own spiritual path with the Sufis and with meditation and yoga as well. So he was completely open, and we would talk about it. And I would say to him, I know I'm supposed to be doing this. I know it's crazy. And I told my parents after I started channeling, and they were curious. They didn't really know what it was, but they were incredibly supportive of me.
So at what point did you realize that what the information that you were bringing through had value to others and others were hungry for the information?
I think in the beginning, when I first started, I was telling my friends about it, and I said, I know this is crazy. And they were incredibly supportive as well.
Hold on one second. I'm so sorry. I'm going to ask you that question again. I don't know how that got through. It was blocked. It was a telemarketer.
Oh, I couldn't hear anything on this end.
Oh, okay. Well, it was going dee 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 dee. Let me just ask you that question again.
Sure.
So, at what point did you realize that this information that you were bringing forth had value to others?
I think at the very beginning, when I was telling my friends about it and telling them that I felt like this was something that I wanted to do, they volunteered to be guinea pigs. They said, I'm happy to ask questions and get some feedback. And so I took them up on that offer when I first started. I mean, it certainly had value for me. I would ask questions and they would give me the answers. I did it all through automatic writing. So for the first 2 years, I have books that have every question I asked and every answer I was given. But I could see as I was working with people how it helped them to shift their perspective on things, and that could help them to heal. It could help them to align more with their joy and happiness, health. So, I mean, I think it just kind of unfolded naturally, and it felt like the right thing to do.
What did you believe about channeling at the time that maybe you don't believe now, or you have a totally different perspective on?
I didn't have a whole lot of preconceived notions about it. And I think now it's much easier to do than it was back then. It took a lot more inner work 30 years ago because the base frequency of the planet was much lower. I think today people are already exposed to so much information about frequency and their own energy and how they're feeling that it makes it much easier to make those small shifts to make that alignment. So I think at the beginning it felt a bit more challenging for people to start to channel, and today I think it's just much easier.
Hey guys, studies are showing that 68% of people that watch podcasts regularly don't click the subscribe button. Do me a huge favor. If you like this content, click subscribe so other people know where to go for the cool stuff. Thank you. And physically, I've heard you talk about how humanity is changing. Can you talk about that? Are we becoming less dense? When you talk about the frequency changing, what does that literally actually mean?
So the frequencies that we hold, so every emotion that we hold is a specific frequency. So when we're holding judgments, those are low vibrational energies that emanate from our auric field. And the auric field is what creates the physical template. So the resonance of your cells is going to be a match for the thoughts and the emotions that you hold. So as you change your thoughts and emotions, you can actually change the frequency of the cell. And the frequency that you hold also determines the environment of your body and what can thrive. So if you've got bacteria and viruses and parasites, things of a lower vibrational nature that aren't a match for your health and well-being, when you're holding higher resonances, those can't survive and thrive. So, if we look at epigenetics, what gets kind of turned on, if you will, what gets expressed based on the energies that we're holding, that's what we're talking about here. So as we let go of judgment, we start to vibrate at a higher rate, and that creates a different physical form for us. So, as the guides explain it, we're going through a process of ascension. So we are increasing our resonance, and that transforms our body, and we're getting to a point where we'll actually cross a dimensional barrier. So we will shift out of this linear perspective of time and this third dimensional way of being, or identity of self as a physical body, into a perception of self as a spark of the divine. And we can create our own reality. We can generate that with the energy that we pulse out.
And what is the key to being available for ascension? And what are the biggest mistakes that most people are making?
I think most people think it's very difficult, and they get lost in the thoughts of the mind. And really, the guides say there are only two things you have to do. One is ground and connect with the earth. And the reason they say that is because our technology that we use today is not in sync with our health and well-being. It is not in resonance with Mother Earth. So as we connect with her, we entrain with her, that puts us back into a natural rhythm of well-being. And if we're doing that, we're also completing our energetic circuit, because a lot of us don't feel particularly safe on this planet. And we'll close down that root chakra, we'll close down that lower energy center so that we're not running as much energy, we're not feeling as much of, let's say, the discomfort that the rest of the collective is experiencing, or that we're experiencing in our own lives. And as we make that connection, we allow that full force of source energy to flow through us again. And then the other thing being heart-centered. So if you're heart-centered, you're present. And if you're present, you're heart-centered. They're one and the same. And to get heart-centered, it's really just as simple as thinking of something that makes you smile. And sometimes if you're having a challenging day, it can be a step process. You might have to keep coming back to this imagery and the frequencies of gratitude, appreciation, compassion. Those higher resonant frequencies will also help you to stay in that heart-centered space.
I've heard you say that you actually keep a file of like baby animals or used to anyway.
I do. It's on my phone.
That is so cute.
And I still will pull it out from time to time if I'm having a really hard day. I know like my body might be telling me that I'm way out of balance and I just can't get my mind to quiet. So I have tools in my toolbox, and keeping a folder of music that transforms my energy very easily, or pictures of baby animals. If I look at them, they help me to heart center again. So yeah, those are tools that the guides gave me early on, and I still use them.
And I totally agree with what you're saying. I really have to get out and take a walk in nature probably twice a day, just because it's like oxygen. Really, really need that. So I love your saying that you said that we can suffer for 3 minutes or 30 years. I think that's what you say, or thereabouts. What does that choice point look like between choosing to suffer for a very short amount of time versus being stuck in a loop that makes us feel like suffering goes on forever?
So the suffering is caused by some sort of judgment, some sort of polarized belief that we're holding on to. So the guides say you can stay there 30 seconds or 30 years. And one of the ways we can move out of that energy is just to give ourselves permission to feel the energy without judgment. So if you know that you're feeling really angry and really frustrated, you can get caught in that mental loop of blame and replaying the situation or the scenario. But if you come back to that heart-centered space, you ground yourself, and then you just give yourself permission to feel, where does that sit in the body? How does the body feel when you run that energy? You might say, oh, I'm really feeling that in the middle of my back. I feel like I've been stabbed in the back. Or you might notice that you feel pressure behind your right eye, or, your muscles feel really stiff. Just observe it without judging it. And then what emotion is it? Because anger feels different than frustration. So it's just beginning to recognize that subtle energy. And then what's happening with the mind? Is the mind active? Is it quiet? If it's active, what's the quality of thought? Is it off telling you a story? Or usually when we do this, the mind's pretty quiet because we're just observing. But if you give yourself permission just to feel that energy, you can allow that energy to complete its journey, to run all the way out. What happens is the moment we feel something we don't like, we want to stuff it down. We don't want to feel it, and it gets trapped. But when you just observe, you allow that energy to keep on moving and move on out. And if you are lost in the story of it, or you're thinking about how you can prevent it from happening again, then you're not really present. So if you're present with it, the guides say you'll stay there for about 45 seconds. That's about as long as you can stay there. If you're staying there longer, then you're lost in the story, or you're trying to project into the future, and you're not on either now moment. You're not in the past, you're not in the future, you're just here. So that's kind of the key to allowing that energy to run, and that will help you to let go of some of that discomfort. Because if you can stay in the heart-centered space, you can start to see solution energy. You can see why you have created the situation, how it serves you. We're creating 100% of our reality, and most people don't like to think about that because they set up a program of blame when they experience something that's less than desirable. But really, it's just an exploration of frequency that led to a particular result. It's no indication of whether we're good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just, here's an energy we're holding. Here's the effect of that energy. So when we go through this process, we can then choose a new frequency that we want to be in alignment with. What would it feel like to feel peaceful? Or what would it feel like to experience forgiveness? What would it feel like to experience joy, happiness, peace? Whatever it is that you want to feel, you can imagine what that would feel like, and that runs that new energy. So when you're in judgment, there's that pain. But when you come back to the heart-centered space, you are no longer polarized to duality. And you'll keep creating situations that will reflect back to you any place that you are in judgment, that you are saying, this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. I want to be separate from this thing over here because that I don't like. The universe wants to bring you back into wholeness. So you'll create opportunities for you to see that, oh, that thing over there is part of source energy. I don't really have to align with it and keep experiencing it, but it's valid. It's a valid exploration of frequency. And that's very different. And it'll create a very different reality for you. And that'll bring you out of that pain cycle.
I love that. And there's so many nuances to it because when you say, I want to experience more calm, I want to experience more joy, I want to experience more abundance, it's very different than, I wonder what it would feel like to feel abundant. It kind of bypasses the conscious mind and gets more directly into that big, beautiful subconscious mind.
It does, because otherwise the ego's like, well, we're not that thing. Especially with the I am statement. I'm happy. I'm joyous. Really? Are we? Because, 2 seconds ago, I was not feeling joyous. So whether you say I am this thing or I wonder what it would feel like to be this thing, both are going to put you in alignment with the frequency. And it's usually easier if you just say, well, what would it feel like?
And our conscious mind really loves that trap of judgment, I'm better than this, not as good as this. This shouldn't be that way. These people need to change. And I love the way you're describing how when we let go of that judgment and just get into centeredness and recognizing the polarity of things without weighing in as to how it should be, because
Right.
it's just a mirror. It's there to teach us something. Is that right?
Yes. So everything that we create, everything we experience either shows us how we're expressing or suppressing our divine light, how we are in alignment with the totality of source energy, or we are trying to be separate from it in some way. And when you can come at it from that perspective, the beautiful thing of the heavy experiences that we have is that it's also an awareness that, oh, there's more light for me to experience. There's more happiness, more joy, more expansion. I just have to align with it. And this limiting belief that I'm holding, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not deserving, that is keeping me down here. And, we're so socially conditioned to judge, that it's so ingrained. It's in the genetic memory. It's in the current collective consciousness. But
it's like it's part of our survival experience. We've got to judge things. We've got to judge things quickly, put them into categories. Okay, these are people I can hang around with. Those are people I can't hang out with. That encoding runs pretty deep.
Yeah, so it's just a small switch to say, you know what? Yes, I can hang out with these people. This is what happens when I hang out with these people. They're not good. They're not bad. But I would like to create something different. I'd like to experience something different. So those aren't really the people to align with to experience that. Or the way that I interact with them isn't the best way in order to experience a higher outcome, because you may not be showing up in a high way. So, sometimes with friends, it's easier to let them go. Sometimes family, you can't. So it's just about how can you change you? How can you change how you respond to the world around you? What energy do you bring to the party?
Why did humans, did we choose to come down into this very dense environment? Because when we look around, it does seem pretty chaotic and sometimes very cruel. Sometimes nonsensical, irrational. You'd think if we can bounce a signal up on a satellite and have it come down 3 seconds later, that we'd be able to figure out how to talk to the person next to us. So why did we choose to come here? And, what's that all about?
Well, the guides describe this as a grand experiment, that there's genetic material from thousands and thousands of worlds. And along with that genetic material comes this wide range of emotional experience. And the whole idea of this grand experiment was to see if we could come down in frequency, if we could remember who we are, incarnate, and slowly forget that, and see if we could come back out. So different planets, different dimensions have different rules of the game, so to speak. There are different, think about soccer or football or basketball. There's a different setup. So the setup of this planet was to see if we could do that. And it would allow us to integrate a lot of programs, a lot of limiting beliefs that weren't integrated in other parts of our galaxy. And this is why we have all that genetic material as a setup. So this is kind of the golden ticket. The guides describe it that way, that there are many beings who wanted to be here. Not everybody gets to be here. It's kind of like who gets to play on the field, who's sitting in the stands, and then there's still more fans out in the parking lot. So that's kind of what's happening here right now, that there are many beings who are interested in what we're doing. Some are, in the stands trying to help us. Others are just kind of watching from afar, because what we experience here, this process of ascension, as we release our judgments and elevate, it will have a ripple effect through the entire universe.
So other beings actually do care what's going on here because we're all kind of connected?
Yes. And, sometimes there are other aspects of us. Sometimes they're part of our soul family. Sometimes they're beings who may have donated their genetic material to, say, the aquatic life, and they're interested in how that will affect them, not so much from the human level, but from the entire planetary level of how we take stewardship and how we relate. So there are all kinds of different reasons why beings show up, but there are many, many beings who are showing up to be of service now, which is in part why there's so many more people who are channeling. It's kind of the first level of contact to get us open to this idea that we're part of a bigger community. And the next step here is really to have that physical interaction. But, we've got a lot of inner work that we have to do, and we've been doing it. And we're getting to the point where we're ready for that.
How many different dimensions are there? Because we think of ourselves as being 3D and kind of developing awarenesses to higher dimensions. Can you talk about the different dimensions? And it's like, and two different dimensions can exist in the same time and space and not be aware of each other. Is that correct?
So there's a lot to unpack there. I'll tell you how the guides describe it to me, and it depends on who you talk to and the nomenclature they use. So the guides describe it as being 12 dimensions, and then there are different ranges within each of those dimensions. You'll hear people who will talk about there being far more. It's just how they are breaking it down. But dimensions have different rules to them. So 5 and up, you have the ability, the awareness that you are part of source energy. You understand that you're creating reality, and time doesn't really exist. All there is the now moment. When we come down here, we partition off our awareness of that so we can play under this illusion of separation. And there are some records that we kind of carry close to us. And these are the ones that we want to access. These are the ones that we're going to pull from for this earthly experience. Think about creating a file, a frequently used file or a favorites folder on your computer. Those are the things that you work with all the time. And then the rest, we have access to everything. We've just closed that off. In the higher dimensional realms, they have greater access, and they can switch back and forth to see themselves as part of an individuated they can see themselves as an individuated consciousness or part of a greater collective. So that's really the biggest difference as we come down into 3D. They can occupy the same space. Time, the guides say, is an illusion. It's just a marker for frequency. It's like the Dewey Decimal System on a book, where you know where to locate that book in the library. They say that's really more what time is like.
That's fascinating. And that's what Einstein said, that time and space is just an illusion, albeit a persistent one. Have the messages that you've brought through been consistent over the decades that you've been doing this, or have they shifted?
No, they've been really consistent. It hasn't really changed much. They might explain things in a slightly different way here or there. Occasionally they'll change the way that they say something. It's kind of like the story that you tell a kindergartner, and then a 6th grader, and then a high school student, and then a PhD student. So it's not that the core message has changed, but the details may have gotten a little more specific. The examples they use might be a little more complex, but their message has always been really consistent about, the fact that we create our own reality, that all we really have to do is to be heart-centered and to ground, and the rest takes care of itself. You know, every challenge that we create for ourselves has a solution, and they're created at the same time. They're two sides of the same coin, and they're just in different vibrational ranges. So it's always about aligning with the frequency of what it is we desire to create. And that's been a huge message that has been really consistent. And they just really want us to know that we are far more powerful than we even begin to think that we are.
Does it take a lot of energy from you to channel? Because I've heard mixed things about it. Sometimes people get really drained and wiped out from it. Other people can pop in and out more easily. You mentioned that it's easier for you now than it was when you started. Is it physically less hard on your body, or has it ever been hard on your body?
When I first started, I could go about 5 minutes, and then, I was doing automatic writing. I'd be asleep with on a notebook with a spiral notebook ring on my face when I woke up. So it's like going to the gym. You kind of have to work out and build up. And, at this point, I'm able to sustain my energy. So it's pretty easy. It's always been fairly easy for me to come in and out of that space. And really, it is just about grounding and heart centering. And if I can do that, I don't have to spend a long time in meditation. I had a friend who is an amazing channel, and he would spend an hour before every time he did an event or he wanted to channel. And we were at an event together, and he was talking about that. He was a little nervous about channeling together on a panel and back and forth because he didn't know about the prep time to get into that space. And my guides were like, you just need to go work with him. Go work with him now. So they asked me to help him to shift into that pretty easily. So we all have the ability. It's also how deep do you want to go? For me, I'm present. I'm not a deep trance channel where I forget everything. That was not the contract that I set up with my guides. But, at this point, I can go for a couple hours before I start to fade.
Can we do a few minutes right here?
Sure. So typically, when I work with the public, the ninth dimensional Pleiadian collective comes in first and foremost. There are other beings who are always present, and I have other guides from different systems, and depends on what I want to ask about. I've got a guide with health. She's always been with me. When she shows up, I know that's what we're going to talk about. So there are many beings, but they work with tone and sound. So their dialect is slightly different than my own. It's not really any one particular dialect. It's just open vowels that they can modulate the frequency.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yes. Hello, dears. This is the Ninth Dimensional Pleiadian Collective, and it is a pleasure and an honor to have the opportunity to connect with you. So we're honored to have a moment with you. And as Wendy was saying, one of our core messages and the things we want you to know are that, one, you are incredible beings when it comes to your ability to create. You're very creative as a species. Not all species are as creative as you are. And that means you can create some rather unique realities for yourselves and unique solutions for the challenges that you currently face. You just have to let yourself out of the mental box that you are putting yourselves in about this is the path we have to take because it's always been this way. No, you're branching out and starting to learn to work with frequency over form. So as you start to imagine the frequencies that you want to experience in your life, as you co-create with the universe is responsible for bringing you form. It will start bringing you new forms, things that you haven't necessarily imagined in your mind as the physical form. And you can start creating brand new solutions for yourself. So we're very excited to see what it is that you all create. And the other thing that we want you to know is that you are loved. You are seen and loved, each and every one of you.
Beautiful. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
How is humanity different today than it was, say, 30 years ago? What energetically, or how have we shifted and changed, and what's important for us to focus on?
Well, there are more of you who are aware that you are not just your bodies, that you are a divine being of light having this physical experience. You are more interested in understanding how you are a vibrational being and how you explore frequency, how that affects the body, how that affects the world around you. So that's a massive shift in paradigm that you all have undertaken in the last, we'll say even 25 years. And, you've still got a ways to go. As you all look out at the world today, you think, things are messed up more than ever. There's this negative thing happening. There's this negative thing happening. So the two things that we would say to that. One, remember what Wendy was saying about the challenge and the solution. So as you start spending more time in what we would call solution energy, higher frequencies, because it's dualistic in nature, you also have the challenges. So as some of you are going higher and higher, others of you are going lower and lower to be the mirror for that. And this is in part why you're seeing things in a bigger way, at a bigger scale. And then also, as you go up higher in frequency, your perception of time is altered. So what that really means is the amount of data that you take in is accelerated. So if you think about 25 years ago, how you experienced your 24-hour day, the amount of data that you experienced, how much information came to you, whether it was through connections with people or whether it was a computer, if you had one back then. And then today, how much information you're taking through the videos, through the internet. So what felt like 24 hours in terms of consumption of information is now happening this year in about 2. It's incredibly accelerated. So what happens when you have this acceleration is that you can begin to see patterns because the pattern repeats at a faster rate. It's a beautiful gift because now you can see patterns that have been going on for a very long time on your planet, but because it took so long to repeat, you couldn't necessarily see it as clearly. Now you can. And you can see some of the things that need to be corrected, shall we say. Things that aren't necessarily working for you collectively, individually, institutions, whether you're talking about educational, political, financial things, health. These are things that now you can see the repeated patterns. And sometimes things will happen, things will come up that can create radical shifts in the collective consciousness. You experienced this back in 2020. It radically altered your perspective of reality. And there are more events that are going to be coming over the next several years to help you to up level very quickly because you are ready.
And I've heard you communicate that even though the collective is having a difficult time with a certain scenario, it's advisable and possible to maintain a more positive frequency amidst that. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So every now moment that you experience is built upon the base frequency of the collective. This is what the collective says is its story, its history. You had World War I, you had World War II. This person won this election. It is the base frequency. And then you've got your own personal stories, things that you say happened to you, that you hold on to, or beliefs that you hold about yourself. That's the base frequency for the moment that you experience now. You're going to be on the now moment that is the most appropriate for you. And by appropriate, we mean the one that allows you to have the greatest soul growth while being of the greatest service to the collective. That is where your consciousness will direct itself. So if you can imagine a massive sphere, and on the surface of this massive sphere are infinite dots, and every infinite dot is a now moment based on that collective desired reality and your personal story. You can move yourself from one side of the circle to the completely opposite side of the circle, but those base frequencies are going to be radically different. And the reality is going to be massively different. Most of the time, you make small incremental shifts. Sometimes some of you will go through a near-death experience or have some radical awakening that will completely alter the belief system that you are holding. That's going to put you on a now moment that is far away from the one that you're currently standing on, and it will create a very different reality for yourself. This is how sometimes people will have a near-death experience, and all of a sudden, whatever disease they had will go into remission because they were able to cross to the other side, see things in a different way, in a different perspective, so they carry a different story, and that is what creates the physical body. So the body goes back into alignment. So you can move to any of these now moments based on the frequency that you're holding. Now, sometimes, as we said, you're on a now moment to have the greatest soul growth and to be of the greatest service. So sometimes the way that you are of service is to be the light, the living example for those who are struggling. But that doesn't mean that you have to suffer through the process. It means that you can hold that space of joy, compassion, happiness, and that will impact those around you. It's not a denial of what may be going on, that others are having a challenging time, but you will find a way to lend your energy to a higher solution as opposed to going down to the problem and wallowing in the problem. That doesn't really serve the collective to grow. So you will always put yourself on a now moment where you can have those highest experiences. Does that help, dear?
That does. Thank you so much. Would you describe the ascension process for us?
It's quite simple. You're just increasing your resonance to a point where you cross a dimensional barrier. Now, this is a bit unique in terms of the third dimension. You're actually in the fourth dimension right now. Because 3D is so fixed in its rules, its ideas of separation and time, you needed an entire dimensional range to shift out. So 3D and 5D are very fixed. 4D has more of a malleable take to it. You can project 3D rules of the game onto the 4D matrix, or you can project 5D onto the matrix. So some of you will have these experiences where you're completely expanded, you're in flow, you know that you're one with the universe, and then you go back to being your 3D version of self. You're still in 4D. So we'll call it 3D because that is the way that you're perceiving yourselves most of the time, as opposed to being 5D. So you're getting to a point here where you're about to cross that dimensional barrier. You're holding your awareness, your focus in the higher ranges, and you're able to sustain it, that you are able to move up, to see yourself as one with all that is, to expand your perception of reality. And that's what ascension is. It's just increasing your resonance to such a level that you will cross into a new dimensional range where the setup of the game is slightly different.
Do we lose our physical bodies when we make that transition?
Not in the way you think. Your body will go through its own transformation. You're going to still have a body the way that you think of it now. It will just be able to run more light through it, more information through it. It won't be as dense and heavy. Illness won't happen in the same way that you experience it now. It will be far more efficient, and it'll be far more malleable because the light that exists within it is such that as you alter your frequency, you can pull more energy at the quantum level. When you got to the fall equinox this last year, you crossed into a dimension or a range of space that was rich with photonic energy. You've been moving through a sector of space which has been high frequency energy, photonic energy, but this was kind of a step up, and you all were at such a level energetically within yourselves that you opened up a quantum doorway within your body so you can start pulling more light at the quantum level. When you think of accessing energy, you think about taking in energy, you think about getting it from the sun, you think about getting it from your food, as opposed to opening up and generating it from within. That's different. That's something that you're starting to access more and more. Those of you who meditate, you might notice within yourself, you might notice more light coming and emanating from within yourself as you visualize. This is part of that. And as you move into the fifth dimensional range and you start existing there, you're pulling more energy from the quantum level. You're not getting it from outside of you.
Beautiful. In addition to grounding and being heart-centered, what are a few practices that are just so useful for the human body, mind, and spirit to exercise each and every day? And actually, I want to add to that, what are the roles, if any, of humor and play?
So isn't grounding and heart centering enough? You all want to make things very, very complicated. So if you can ground, put yourself out in nature. If it's too cold where you live, then you can use your mind. You can visualize connecting with Mother Earth, connecting with the center of the universe and running light between the two. You can work with technology. Your technology will help you as well to find frequency. Heart centering, what we really recommend is for you to check in regularly throughout the day. Have a practice for yourself of awareness. Where are you vibrating? So when you wake up in the morning, what frequency do you want to hold? What frequency do you want to experience for the day? We'd say start with 1 or 2, not too many, because you're learning how to recognize subtle energy. And if you've got too many things going on, you can't really perceive it. So start with 1. Maybe you want to feel energized. Maybe you want to feel peaceful. So imagine what that would feel like as you're laying there in bed before you get up. And then as you go through your day, keep checking in either every half hour, every hour. Am I feeling peaceful right now? Yes, I'm doing pretty well. And then you can imagine it some more and deepen that sensation with that. And then you go off to work and then you're at work. Am I feeling peaceful? Not so much. And so you have to recalibrate yourself. What would it feel like to be peaceful again? And then you keep doing this throughout the day. So hopefully every time you check in, you are in alignment. And if you're not, then you have the opportunity to realign. So when you go up to that frequency, hopefully you stay there longer. And every time you drop out, you don't drop out as far. So that can allow you to kind of recalibrate very quickly, as opposed to choosing a frequency in the morning, then having your whole day pass and being spun out. And then you get to the end of the day and you're way down again. So it's about repetition, checking in. This will allow you to become more aware of your subtle energy, reading subtle energy. And it doesn't matter what you want to do, whether you want to create your own reality, whether you want to communicate with your guides, whether you want to have better health. It's all about subtle energy and learning to read and recognize subtle energy. And this can be the first step for you. That will help you tremendously. It sounds so simple, and you think, well, what can that do for me? It can do everything for you. Most of what you want to create, it's just about very simple things that you do, making adjustments within your perception of reality. Heart centering. There really isn't a time that we've spoken to you all in 30 years that we haven't discussed it. We sound like a broken record because it is just that important. It is the key to everything because you have 2 operating systems. In order to play under the illusion of separation, you set up an operating system of the ego mind where the programs of lack, limitation, and separation exist. The heart center is the gateway to access multidimensional information. There is no separation through the heart center. There's no judgment there. It is you in the present moment. And you have to move into the operating system of the heart, and you're staying there more and more and more. If you are in judgment, you're in the ego programs, re-heart center. And in that heart-centered space, you'll find all the solution energy. So what shifts in your perspective you need to make, what actions you need to take, you'll be in flow. It's not complicated, but you make it complicated in the mind.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
We're just so happy to be here. And we want you all to know that you have the ability to connect with any of us on the other side. If you ground in heart center, set your intention, ask your question, and we'll put the information in your field or in your path until you get it or you no longer want it. But you are tremendously supported. Trust in yourselves. Trust in your own discernment. You've got the best answers for you.
Beautiful.
All right.
Thank you.
So it's been our pleasure. So until we hear from you, we are around, we are watching, we are waiting, and we are sending many, many well wishes.
That was delightful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have one more question. There's a lot of different channelers out there. I'm assuming some of them are channeling different kinds of messages. How does one know what's a channeler I should be listening to versus maybe not?
I think you have to use your own discernment, what resonates with you. And that's a message that hasn't changed with the guides from the very beginning. When I channel or somebody else channels, there are all different layers and levels of the coloring of information. So the beings who are, bringing in the information, they are coloring their perspective based on the dimension and their experiences. And then as I am interpreting the frequencies, putting it into language, I'm coloring it with my experiences. And then as you're hearing it, you're coloring it with your own filters and experience. So you have to take the bits and pieces that resonate and leave the rest behind. And there may be a time where you feel like something resonates with you, and then you go and you develop further, and all of a sudden that doesn't resonate in the same way. And you find that something else does, and that's okay. We're going to grow, we're going to change. And if there's something that is important for you to know, it'll come to you in another way. You'll get it another way.
I've also heard you say that there aren't really layers to things. That's our human construct. Can you talk about that? There's not a low level and a high level. Can you talk about that?
So we're all sparks of the divine. We're already up at source level. We're just compartmentalizing our little spark to go and explore in a frequency in a particular way. So sometimes we think that we're at the bottom and we've got to work our way back up. We're already there. And the guides will say, you are already that which you seek to become. And it's just realizing that, they're a part of us. We're a part of them. They're just playing this character or this role to explore an experience and frequency. And, that's a very empowered state to be in when you really think about it, that we're the same. When you think about source as being all that is, it means that I am part of you, you're a part of me. We just partitioned off that awareness so that we can play under this illusion.
Very cool. Wendy, how do people find you? How do they stay in touch with you? Do you do one-on-ones, or are you just teaching groups and writing books? What are you doing?
So unfortunately, I don't do one-on-ones anymore. They're just trying to reach as many people as possible. So we do have monthly, either a group session or a particular focus for an event every single month. And then we also have our monthly membership. But people can find more information over on my website at higherfrequencies.net.
Beautiful. Higherfrequencies.net. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule and sharing that words of grounding and open-heartedness with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Folks, please share this with anybody that you know that would benefit from hearing this message. Click like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode of Next Level Healing. This podcast is intended for the purpose of providing information and education. It does not provide advice and is not meant to be used for any self-diagnosis or the replacement of any kind of licensed professional. The creators and individuals appearing here do not endorse any specific tests, positions, medications, products, or procedures. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.